All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here with our 2025 preview and prediction for the Virginia Cavaliers. One of this coaching staff remains intact for 4 years now. It's Tony Elliott as the lead man, Des Kitchings as the offensive coordinator, John Rudzinski be calling the shots on defense. Pretty good portal class, top 25 in that realm, 58th in the high school ranks, 5-7 mark last year for Virginia. Looking at this offense to get things started, this offense wasn't awful last year, even though the numbers would show that. At times I watched Virginia, and they showed competence on offense. Now they lose everybody, though. They only return 2 starters, and they hit that portal heavy. And I thought they made some big-time additions, and of course you're going to start with Chandler Morris at quarterback. This is a guy who showed great command of a pass-heavy North Texas unit. This is a guy with a quick release, nice downfield touch, has no problem throwing into traffic, showing nice vision. He's good, but not great when it comes to arm strength. Can make good throws on the run, though. Has really nice speed to do work as a runner. Really think, he seems to thrive on corner routes, either in the red zone or on the plane. I think on breaking routes really showcases his ability to throw on a line as well. I think Morris is a big-time addition. I didn't think he was going to end up at Virginia, Nick, but this is where he's at. He's a Cavalier, and as good as Anthony Calandria was last year, Morris, I think, is certainly an upgrade.
Yeah, I think Chandler Morris is certainly an upgrade over a quarterback room that had Anthony Calandria and Tony Muskett in it last year. Both of them moved on. They find themselves in different positions, and now you're going to plug in Chandler Morris, who was pretty good at North Texas last year, 3,700 yards passing. Pretty solid number there, 63% comp rate. Maybe a little bit lower than we were hoping for, but still a really solid number. 31 touchdowns for him, 12 interceptions last year. He also had 4 rushing touchdowns, not really a big part of his game, but he did have 60 attempts on the season overall. He was in a pass-heavy offense at North Texas, slung the ball a ton. He's bounced around college football. He was at Oklahoma and TCU previously. But I think he slots in pretty well. Tony Elliott's obviously an offensive mind. He worked with some good offenses at Clemson prior to taking the job at UVA, so they're going to hope he can kind of turn Chandler Morris into a little more reliable, cut down on the turnovers, cut down on a little bit of the percentage, a completion percentage. Obviously, attempting 512 passes is a lot per season, so they'll probably have him around a similar number again this year. I think he elevates his offense. I think he's a pretty solid quarterback to plug in. Not a bad portal get at all, and I think this could be a really solid asset under center for UVA.
Now you look at this backfield. This is a group I think is pretty solid as well. Xavier Brown was an impressive player. He was efficient, made some big plays, especially in the pass game. I think he's going to see double the workload this year. Jamari Taylor had 1,100 yards and 15 scores last year at the FCS level for North Carolina Central. Noah Vaughn returned, seeing most of his action come across the final 3 games of the year. So I think this is a solid backfield. I think Brown's going to have a great year. I think this is a group that's certainly going to up their production from 94th nationally to I think potentially a top 60-70 rushing attack for Virginia based off just talent alone. It was a nice 1-2 punch last year of Kobe Pace and Xavier Brown. And again, Nick, I think the production's certainly in line for an increase this year.
Yeah, I like what they have here. This is a solid unit overall. Xavier Brown, a really good back to lead the way. Just under 500 yards rushing for him last year, 6.1 yards per attempt, and a score for him. He also had 2 receiving touchdowns on 9 grabs, so he'll be involved in the passing attack in the red zone. Noah Vaughn was not bad on his limited touches, 120 yards on very limited touches. He's a decent back to have further down your depth chart. Taylor comes over for NC Central after dominating the FCS level. Very intriguing, potentially move there. Harrison Wiley comes over as well from Wyoming, where he had 325 yards and a touchdown last year. He had 5 and 1,000 yards rushing in 2023. He's an interesting prospect to bring in as a veteran who's been around the sport for a little bit here. I think the rushing attack should be solid. They were 94th in the nation last year, probably a little disappointing if you're a UVA fan, but I think they'll improve and they'll be pretty strong on the ground this year.
Let's move to the wide receiver group that Morris will be throwing to. Trill Harris, he was really good early in the season of 200 yards and 13 grabs across the first 3 games before getting hurt. Jamal Edrine brings great size to the room, 6'5", 220 pounds. He had 365 yards last season. That was good back in 2022 for FAU, so he is a veteran of college football. Courtney Cameron got on the field plenty last year as a true freshman. Limited production, though, for him. Andre Green's a rising senior, also quite limited numbers in his career. Sudarian Harrison, only 200 yards in his first 2 seasons. Another good transfer I like in Jaden Thomas from Notre Dame. He's 6'2", 220. Had 830 yards across 3 seasons. Dakota Twitty, he'll be the top tight end. He caught a touchdown versus Clemson last year. That was pretty much it, though. So this room, not really a fan of. I think Harris is going to have a big year. I think you can point to a guy like Thomas who'll come in to be an impact player. But they're not as good as they were in recent years. Malachi Fields, of course, was tremendous for them for a couple of seasons. Malik Washington had a historic season a couple years back. And Dontavian Wicks, of course, was in this room. So they've had good guys, Nick, in the past, but this year is just not as stout. And I think that could certainly lead to some issues in an offense that's probably going to want to throw the rock a good bit.
Yeah, definitely a weaker wide receiving room, which certainly kind of hampers you if you want to be that sort of pass-heavy approach with Chandler Morris under center, who is really good at launching the ball downfield. He had some good receivers to work with at North Texas. Definitely a weaker room here. I think Charles Harris, though, is a phenomenal player. 220 for him last year. He was pretty solid overall. 14.7 yards per attempt, or yards per catch, that is, and 2 scores last year. Cameron Courtney had 115 yards, unlimited grabs. Za'Darian Harrison had 100 yards, unlimited grabs. So he's a guy that they may want to get involved. They added 2 guys from the portal. Endron coming over from Purdue. He had 365, 15.9 yards per grab, and 2 scores. Decent production from him. I think Jaden Thomas was a pretty good add from Notre Dame. He had 165 yards and 2 scores last year. Had 310 and 2 scores the year prior. A good veteran player to add into your wide receiving room. Definitely a weaker unit in the conference. I'm a little concerned about this unit, but I do think Charles Harris is a pretty good headliner.
You look at the offensive line, a group that's certainly been an issue for UVA, especially left tackle. Big position of weakness for the Cavs last year. Mikhail Boley played the most reps. He'll be back as the starter now as a senior. Tayshawn Wyatt comes over from James Madison, who missed last year, but he was a 3-year starter prior to that. Wasn't all that good, though, having 14 sacks in that span. Noah Josie returns to left guard. He's one of the top guards in the conference, giving up only 2 sacks. The Cavs are going to lose a great center, but they replaced him with a good one in Brady Wilson, who was an elite 3-year starter for UAB, 6'2", 298 pounds. Kevin Wigginton, 6'5", 335. Only saw a few snaps for Illinois, but in 2023 was an above-average starter for Michigan State. Right tackle is going to be occupied by Monroe Mills, who on his 4th different school now. But he's been a great pass blocker over the last 3 years as a starter, regardless of where he's been at. So this is another one of those shocking ads, kind of like Morris. For them being able to bring in Mills is very impressive. And again, UVA had one of the nation's worst offensive lines last year. Did a great job in the portal. I think the left side can really grow with the 2 starters coming back. I think they progress a great deal up front.
Yeah, I think they do end up being a decent unit come the end of the season. It's still a weakness for this team. I think Boley's a really good player at left tackle. I like to see what he continues to do this year. I think Josie's not a bad asset at left guard either as well. I think that's really good to get your 2 left party or offensive linebacker, your left tackle, left guard. That is interesting add in Wilson out of the portal. I think he could be a really solid add. I liked what he did at times at UAB. Could be a solid asset. Drake Metcalf could be pretty good at right guard if he takes a step forward as a more veteran program. They added in, they have Kevin Waddington as well, who could potentially play right guard for this team. He was a transfer that should be pretty solid overall. And then when you bring in Monroe Mills, I think was a really phenomenal add as well. A guy that they're really hoping can be a great add out of the portal. I like what they have here overall. I think there will progress. It's still a weak unit on paper, don't get me wrong, but I think it will progress and this offense in general will take a big step forward in my opinion. I think they will do so on the O-line and in the pass game.
Now look at the offensive verdict for UVA. The Cavs offense has always had playmakers. They've just never really been able to turn that into collective production, but I think they could change with the add of Chandler Morris and some assets up front. I think they can improve across the boards. They have a solid running back room, respectable rotation of pass catchers is the best way to put that. I think Elliott can get them to 30 points per game. It seems unlikely, but 4 touchdowns a game is what I'm sensing. I expect some sizable leaps from this offense, and that's what I'm putting the expectations on, Nick, a B-minus 30 a game, and I think they'll be a more competitive unit.
Yeah, I think they will be a more competitive unit. I think 30 per game is certainly within the realm of possibility. I expect Chandler Morris to sling the rock a ton this year. They're going to throw the ball a lot, which I think is a really good idea. I don't know if I love the passing group or the O-line, but I think both units will progress throughout the season. I do think running back is a pretty sneaky good unit that could certainly find a way to be a strength come the end of the season. I like what Tony Elliott can do as an offensive coordinator. I think he's a pretty solid coach overall, and he can put together something really solid for this offense. Morris was a great add of the portal, as was Monroe Mills. 2 difference makers that will step up and be huge to this offense. I do think this Virginia offense could shape out to be a pretty decent offense come the end of the season.
Now we move to the defensive side of the ball group. It also wasn't all that great last year. They did well against the run, but in terms of their ability to limit scoring and passing yards was not all that ideal. They returned 5 starters. You're going to start the defensive line, where they also picked up a good amount of transfers. Kazim Moore comes over from Elon, being a 3-year starter, was really good versus the run these past 2 years. Mitchell Melton comes over from Ohio State. He was solid when he got on the field the last 2 years, but was mainly late in games in rotation. Fisher K-Mac, he was a phenomenal run defender for UNLV this past season, so some solid portal help. They don't return much. Terrell Jones, he got on the field for nearly 300 snaps. He was a below-average performer. As a team, they only had 19 sacks last year, better than they were in 2023, but still a very weak part of this football team. The interior defensive line returns Jameer Carter, who was good versus the run at 310 pounds at 33 tackles. Jason Hammond, 295-pounder, was seeing plenty of action rotation across the first 4 games before getting hurt. Hunter Osborne, a 300-pounder, comes over from Alabama. Barely saw the field last year, though. Anthony Britton, 311 pounds, was not that bad with 39 tackles as a starter. Could have been more consistent versus the run. So I don't think the interior defensive line is all that bad. They have some size and rotation. Pass rush could potentially make some waves with the portal adds, but it's been a big struggle area, again, despite having good players off the edge for Virginia, Nick. So we're just not getting guys to produce, and I think they'll improve in all areas up front this year as well on the defensive side of the ball, but to what tune?
They were pretty good against the run last year, 145th in the nation, or 145 yards per game. They're 58th in the nation, I beg your pardon. That was a pretty solid number, but they do lose a lot of that production, and they really, bring in some different guys to the portal, hopeful to try and find a way to get some of that production back. I do think they made some interesting moves. I'll start with their return. Anthony Britton, 39 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. He was solid at times. Shaheem Carter, 33 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack for him last year. Terrell Jones, 22 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss. He's got to be better. Jason Hammond played in 4 games and had 11 total tackles. They bring in Kazim Moore from Elon. He was really good for that FCS school last year. Curious to see if he can make the jump up this season. It's a very intriguing player. Mitchell Melton from Ohio State, when he was on the field, he was solid in limited reps. 12 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him last year. They bring in Fisher Carmack from UNLV, a great ad in my opinion. 46 total tackles, 15 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, 3 QB hurries. He could be a huge difference maker. Hunter Osborne comes from Alabama. He was highly rated out of high school. They're hoping he can transition well here. I like some of the depth. I like that they went to the portal and added a bunch of different guys here. I think they could really get something out of Melton and Carmack, who could be really big difference maker for this defensive line.
Look at the middle of this defense. They're going to get back Cam Robinson. He was a phenomenal starter for them. He's been good versus the run. Had a team high 5 sacks, but he did really struggle in coverage. James Jackson played 400 snaps across 7 games. He was about an average player, but did make some big plays early on in the season before he also got hurt. Added Maddox Marcellus, who was a good starter for Eastern Kentucky this past season in his first year in that role. Trey McDonald, he was the main starter, but didn't exactly set the conference on fire by any means. But again, he did get valuable reps, and most of this room has good experience. If healthy, I think this can be one of the better groups in the conference. I'm a big fan of Cam Robinson. If Marcellus can come over from the FCS level and make some type of an impact, I think you'll certainly see improvements. So I'm not upset with this defensive linebacking group one bit, Nick. I would consider it probably the strength of the defense.
I think it is certainly the strength of the defense. I like what they have here. Cam Robinson, a great player to return. 64 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, a pick, and a pass breakup for him last year. Trey McDonald, 58 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a sack, a pick, and a pass breakup from him as well. I was pretty pleased with both of those guys. I think they're really solid. They profile like continue getting better here. They bring in Marcellus from the FCS level. I think he's a pretty good asset potentially. Eastern Kentucky, going to be a tough jump up to the ACC, but overall I still think he's a really good player. Cam Robinson and James Jackson are just all both really talented players. James Jackson, 45 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks last year. So I like what they returned there. Pretty good production out of those guys. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid unit. Definitely the highlight of the defense for me.
Now you're going to move to the secondary for Virginia. GM Jackson returns to his post as a full-time starter at corner. He really struggled in coverage, but was not bad against the run. Joey Walker only played about 70 snaps in 4 games. Jason Prevert from Morgan State was really impressive back in 2023. Wasn't as consistent this past season, though. You have a true freshman in CJ Spence. He's also going to be in the fold, as not much depth is really pronounced. It's pretty evident there. Safety group is in a tad better standing. Coming over from Louisville's Devin Neal has been a quality starter his entire career, but has struggled with health. And that was an issue again last year. But when he's on the field, he's pretty good. He's consistent against the run. I think he's respectable in coverage as well. So Neal is looking to be a difference maker. Antonio Clary, he's been so good in his career. He got hurt after only 6 games last year. He was tremendous in all regards before that. He's been an efficient tackler, and he's been really good versus the run in his career. Depth is very young as well. You have a redshirt freshman, Ethan Miner, got on the field. Caleb Hardy's going to be a starter in that rover-type position. Wasn't a good tackler, and he struggled in coverage in nearly 200 reps. You have a redshirt sophomore, Landon Danley, who's going to battle with him. I think the secondary has 2 good safeties, but the cornerback group is quite lackluster, and I think it's probably going to be a significant weakness. Clary is phenomenal, Nick. He's going to ball out at safety. Of course, they're going to lose a guy in Jonas Sanker, who was tremendous last year in the safety spot. So I think this is a respectable part of the defense. Just depth is not all that evident.
Yeah, Claria is a phenomenal player. I think he was really good in the 6 games he played. He had 48 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 3 pass breakups, plus a pick in the 6 games he played. I mean, that's really solid production. He will be phenomenal for the team, probably the top tackler when it's all said and done. Ethan Minter is your only other returning production in the secondary, 18 total tackles, a tackle for loss, and a pick for him last year. They went to the portal hard. They added a lot of different names. Donovan Platt comes over from Army, 15 total tackles, 2 picks, 2 pass breakups. Interesting to see how he transitioned. Interesting process. Devin Brandon Neal, a great player from Louisville who didn't play a whole lot last year, but he had 74 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 4 picks, 6 pass breakups in 2023. They're hoping to get back to that level. Keenan Johnson comes in from Utah. He was an interesting ad. He was pretty good at Georgia Tech in 2023, 29 total tackles, a pick, and 3 pass breakups. A pretty interesting ad at corner. Jordan Robinson comes in from Cincinnati after bouncing around a couple different programs, didn't do a whole lot. Christian Charles comes in from Tennessee, where he played safety last year, 28 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss for him. And then Emmanuel Carney comes in with 16 total tackles, 5 pass breakups from Arizona. They're hoping he could be an impact player as well. I think Jam Jackson, Pavard at corner. I don't know if I really love that as well. Pavard was an interesting ad who they're hoping they can get something out of him as well. He was a guy that they were picking up late in the cycle from Morgan State. They're hoping he could be really solid for this team as well. Overall, only the secondary is very good. I think it's a weak unit. They struggled against the pass mightily last year, 121st in the nation. Just a very poor unit. I don't see much progression here. I think it will be a big liability and really hold this defense back.
Looking at the verdict for this unit, the Cavs defense is just not going to be able to take steps forward until we can correct 2 major problems. That's a weak pass rush and a lack of playmakers at the cornerback position. I think the pass rush will march forward a little bit, but depth is weak in that back end, and the pass defense will probably be sluggish. I like the linebacking group. Likely won't be enough, though, to really move the needle all that much. I think the defense should improve a little bit on the stat sheet, probably in every area. Pass defense, I'm not all that hopeful for, though, so I'm going to go ahead and give this defense a C+. This has been a problem under Tony Elliott, Nick. No pass rush. No skill at corner. I mean, those are the 2 worst things that can happen to your defense working against each other there, and that's where Virginia's in this predicament.
Yeah, really the only positive for this defense last year was an above average run defense, a top 60 unit in that regards to top half in college football. But outside of that, this is a weak defense. The secondary should be just as bad as it was last year. I'm not seeing enough progress. They went to the portal, but I don't think they did enough with the portal ads. I love what they have at linebacker, but I think they're going to struggle to find a pass rush again this year. I expect the secondary to get torched week in, week out, and that will be a big problem for this defense. I'm just not seeing enough progress here. I question the long-term vision with this defense. Giving up 28.8 points per game is just not good enough, and I think the defense will continue to hold this team back.
Look at the schedule and the prediction for Virginia. It's obviously do or die time for Tony Elliott and his staff to show some signs of life, as despite having some good talents over the years, have not been able to produce results. I think the add of Chandler Morris is going to allow them to go down with a fight with a respectable supporting cast and offensive line that should improve. Defense should be slightly better, but the weaknesses really need to showcase some movement forward for them to be able to really compete. I have them go 7-5 this year, Nick. It's a pretty weak schedule. You're looking at, can this team, secure a signature victory? I think your best opportunity for that would maybe be at Louisville, but you don't have any really marquee home games. Nothing really at all that is impressive. I think a win late in the year over a rival Virginia Tech would certainly be helpful, and then you can get to a bowl game and maybe win 8 games this year. So I think this is going to be a positive season for the Cavs. I think Tony Elliott will stick around. If they don't make a bowl game, you asked me, would he still be around? Take a second look at the schedule. If they don't make a bowl game, I think he's probably out, because this is kind of lackluster, and it should be pretty simple. Even if you lose to a resurgent Florida State team, you should still be able to make the postseason. So I think Virginia will be in for a good season. I think the team collectively would be too good for them not to achieve those results.
Yeah, I pitched that idea to you when we were talking about this team before we started recording, because I do think this is kind of do or die for Tony Elliott. And if they don't make a bowl game this year, I think it's hard to justify keeping him around. Through his first 3 seasons, doesn't have a bowl appearance, 3-7, 3-9, 5-7. Sure, you saw some progress in 2024, but still no bowl game. If you go 4 years in a row in the ACC at a program like Virginia not making a bowl game, I think that's a pretty disappointing thing to see in your head coach, and you might want to make a move. I wouldn't blame they want to make a move. This offense has been good, but the defense has not progressed at all, and the offense is still not progressing to the level that you would hope so. This schedule is really easy. I mean, you look at this schedule, the non-conference is pretty easy. The conference splits are pretty easy as well. You dodge Clemson, you dodge some of the tougher teams in the conference like Miami as well. Sure, you got to travel to Louisville, but outside of that, I mean, some of these road trips are not super difficult necessarily on paper. This is a season they got to figure it out. I think Chandler Morris is a phenomenal add at quarterback. I think he'll be really good. I like what they added in the portal at the O-line as well. The defense is just my biggest concern here. They're going to have to outscore a lot of these teams and put up a ton of points if they want to find themselves in contention for the postseason. I think they will eventually get to a bowl game. They'll find a way to go 7-5, get to a bowl game. But if they don't, I think Tony Elliott loses his job, and it wouldn't really surprise me at all. I think the decision would be quite justified. A team I'll keep an eye on. They're a team that'll kind of luck themselves into a lot of wins, I think, based off the strength of the schedule. Not too difficult, pretty cut and dry. Really, I mean, Tony Elliott, got to get the job done here. Got to get this team to a bowl game. There's too much talent on the offense and defense to miss out on one this year.
I mean, Louisville and Duke are the hardest teams you're playing in conference, and I'd say those are certainly beatable opponents. Maybe not Louisville as much. I think NC State will be pretty good this year. Another winnable thing. I mean, you avoid all the top dogs. You also don't have Notre Dame on your schedule, so we got to see some results this year. It's going to be for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.